Hello, hello. What is good, everybody? Research here, and I bring forth the news of a series. I will be bringing you guys a brand new series that revolves around the era of this particular game. So essentially, the time frame in which this game was kind of trying to capture with everything. Being as though I'm a history major in college and also kind of a history buff, and this actual time is really where my focus is. I think it'd be really interesting to bring that to you guys. So what I'm going to do, the first video is going to be this one, and it's going to be kind of discussing just kind of what led up to this point in time. By the way, the focus of everything will be the Bay of Pigs, which was extremely influential in many ways in American society and culture and the way we approach our government and the way our government approaches us. So I'm going to kind of lead into that. This is just going to be kind of a discussion again about the time, kind of the 50s moving into the 60s and kind of what that brought. And then I'm going to leave with a little soundbite of the president of that time, whom I'm sure you all know of, John F. Kennedy. But to me, one of the last genuine representation of the people presidents. So I'm going to leave you with a very famous soundbite from him. I think will lead really well into the next video, which is going to be entirely a discussion on the Bay of Pigs itself, what went into it, how it was set up, who led it, who guided it, and why it failed. And then the last video is going to be an entire soundbite. It's a speech given by John F. Kennedy, and he's addressing just that, the failure of the Bay of Pigs. And it's a really awesome and famous speech, and given by one of the best speakers of all time, John F. Kennedy. So anyway, let's get into this. I want to try and get in there fast. You guys knew what to expect. This is, again, video 1 of a part 3 series regarding this. And I'll go into some other things after these 3 are done. So no worries. Okay. So in the 1950s, what was happening was a lot of men, a lot of servicemen, right, were leaving the service. World War II had just basically wrapped up. You know, you have to figure, yes, the war ended in the mid-40s, but of course it takes years for people to begin to rebuild, and that was exactly what happened in the 50s. So business began to boom, people began to spend more money, right? There was all these factories in place to help support the war effort, and all these factories began to manufacture consumer goods once again, and we saw a huge rise, a huge spike in our economy, just based on spending and more jobs, and which provided more, there was more corporations and so on and so forth. And the 50s also saw kind of an entry into the 60s, whereas we think of the 60s as this revolutionary time period in American culture and society. And, you know, the 50s was really kind of the spawning point for that. You know, the 50s provided you look at it this way, it was unconstitutional in the mid-50s. It became unconstitutional via the U.S. Supreme Court to not allow racial segregation within public schools. You have to figure the American institution of slavery, how virtually embedded that was into our society since the beginning, since before the beginning, and that really began to disassemble when our government decided to take a step in a positive direction to say it is unconstitutional to not allow someone, or not someone, just to allow segregation whatsoever in public schools. So you just have to look at the time and think about how genuinely, you know, revolutionary that frame of thought really was, just how unusual thinking of that nature was, you know. You know, it was during this period of time as well that Dwight D. Eisenhower began the U.S. Interstate Highway. I can't remember the exact terms of it, but that was in fact an initiative brought forth by Eisenhower and the Eisenhower administration to develop a better infrastructure regarding roadways in the United States. So more jobs being, you know, born and birthed, and of course we've got, these are all essentially the baby boomers, right? These are all well, not the baby boomers. The baby boomers at this point are essentially teenagers, right? So that's this is what you're growing up with, right? That's really what I'm trying to get at. So if you're 14 or 15 years old growing up in the mid-1950s, you're being exposed to a lot of change. A lot of things that you weren't taught in school, a lot of things that would be very, very, very unique to what you know. And you're very impressionable. And this is really kind of what led into the 60s. The 60s is thought of and will always be regarded as a time. I've used the word revolution almost too much, and I don't want to overuse it, but it really was revolutionary ways of thinking and genuine change in the cultural fabric of American life. You know, there's absolutely no doubt that this is really one of the most influential times of the century. Many things began to adjust. Many people began to think outside the box. They started to move away from the ultra traditional ways of the 30s and the 40s and the 50s. Man works, woman home. Man works, woman home. Kind of that caveman style type thing, you know. And this really began to adjust and to change all of that. And people were very much becoming highly interested in human rights, extremely interested in what it was their government was actually doing, right? You know, people began to take a vested interest. People began to challenge the system, you know. And all this here, right? We talk about all of this here happening in the United States of America, and out here, elsewhere in the world, we've got tons of change happening as well. It was in the late 50s that Cuba was actually overthrown. Fidel Castro took control of Cuba. So there's large fluctuation happening all over the planet. And then you can't forget about Nikita Khrushchev, the leader of the Soviet Union, who was also... The Soviet Union at this time was beginning to birth as a superpower. And so you're given a communist government with all the power, monetary financing that they would possibly need. And it's genuinely... You think about this time, and there's no doubt that when we think of World War III, I think of the 50s to 60s as kind of that area in which that, by all rights, should have happened. Just the instability globally, all of the adjustments happening locally. So let me just leave you here with this soundbite from John F. Kennedy. It's a very famous speech that he gave as a commencement speech at the American University, and this was on June 10th, 1963. So just give this a listen.
So let us not be blind to our differences, but let us also direct attention to our common interests and the means by which those differences can be resolved. And if we cannot end now our differences, at least we can help make the world safe for diversity. For in the final analysis, our most basic common link is that we all inhabit this small planet. We all breathe the same air. We all cherish our children's futures. And we are all mortal.